Right, welcome everybody to this session. So hopefully at this session, we're going to give you some indication of how to fill in your NRF proposal. Can I just get confirmation? Maybe someone can just shout out, Tina, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Great. I'm just going to go along the presentation. I'm not going to watch any hands. So if any students have questions as we go along, please feel free to shout out and let me know what your question is, and I'll try to tackle these as I go through the presentation. I'll also leave some room as I go along where I will ask for questions that people have. But if there's anything that you need to ask me, please feel free to do so. I just want to try and hide this panel. All right. So basically what we're going to do in this particular workshop is to tell you a little bit about the process, the NRF proposal process. We're going to take you through how to writing a proposal. So this is not a technical workshop where we're going to show you what buttons to press, how to go on the system, what you can expect in each of the systems. There will be a follow-up workshop by someone from the NRF. And that person from the NRF will take you into the system, show you how to log into the system, what sections you need to complete, etc., etc. The purpose of this workshop is going to tell you how, or give you an indication of what is required in this particular proposal. Having gone through many years now where students have submitted proposals and they come to us in the first instance for screening, we realize that a lot of students really don't know what to write in this application. They don't really have their thoughts clear. And even if they have an idea of what they want to do, they don't know how to articulate this properly. So I'm hoping that this workshop will give you some guide as to how to go about entering into that process, how to go about thinking about the process, what homework you actually need to do before you decide I want to apply for an NRF grant for my master's or PhD. A lot of people think there's actually no work involved and I can go straight into the computer, log onto the system and start filling in the application. And that is the worst thing you can actually do. So hopefully at the end of this, you're going to have some better direction. Right, so an outline of what we're going to do today. I'm hoping that we are not going to be too long because I know we're all very busy and you also have things to do. I'll try to keep this under 2 hours. Hopefully within 2 hours we can complete. So hopefully by 11 o'clock or so, we can complete. And I'll try to take a gap in between as an appropriate place and to give you a leg stretch and allow you a comfort break, maybe for about 10 minutes or so. Good. So the outline is going to be an introduction and the purpose. I'm going to take you through the scorecard to show you what the review criteria are, what we actually look for, and how you actually scored when we try to actually award bursaries to the NRF, or we actually try to score you to submit your application to the NRF and what the reviewers actually look for. I'm going to then show you what to write and how to write it. When I say what to write, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to write. I'm just going to give you some indication of the things that you need to write in the different sections, right? And then some pointers on how to write it. Sometimes you have the material, but you don't make an impact. So I'm going to show you or give you some tips about how you can actually make an impact in your proposal. And then some tips on checking. And checking is very, very important, especially when you apply for things. The reviewers don't like to see an application where there's a lot of grammatical errors, spelling errors, a lot of technical errors where things are jumping around the place, etc. So just to tell you a little bit about checking. I've got a section on opinion here. So in many cases, you know, we do things at the last minute. And if you do things at the last minute, you won't have time to either do the checking or the opinion. So I'm going to also do some time management, session with you where I tell you when to start applying, how to apply, etc. So it gives you enough time to check your application, send it to other people so they can give you an opinion as to what they think about it, what you should either add or delete or make it better. But I think that opinion is very, very important. And then the last section on supervisor approval, which is very, very important. But I'll talk to that as we go along. So just to show you the scorecard, now this is the previous one. You might get an updated one. We didn't have one at the time for this review, but it hasn't changed much from year to year. For the last 3 years, it's been around the same type of scorecard. The important thing to note is that there are some things in the applications which are not in your control, and there's some things that are. So the things that are not in your control, you don't really have much of a say in that. And one good example is the academic merit. So when you're applying for a particular grant, either a master's or a PhD grant, a certain weight is given to your academic mark. Now, this is the academic mark in your previous degree. So if you are a master's student applying for a PhD bursary, and you have not completed your master's yet, right? What will happen is that the application will be ongoing. You can apply, and as soon as your master's mark is made available, then you will then get an academic merit mark depending on these criteria here. Now, at the outset, you can actually see, and I'm taking your attention to this last box. If you have a mark of 64 and below, you are not eligible for funding. So if you have an honors degree where you don't have a credit weighted average of 65%, or if you have a master's degree without a credit weighted average of 65%, you're not eligible to apply for NRF funding, right? Now, this goes without saying. If you are a master's student already in a master's degree that has not completed, right? You can fill in the application form, and if at the particular time when you do get your master's result, if it's 65 and over, your application will be considered. If it's under 65, 64 and below, then your application will be rejected automatically, right? So you won't be eligible. Now, if you're not eligible, I just want to spend a minute or two on this. If you're not eligible, it doesn't mean now that all hope is lost and you cannot do anything. If you are not eligible, if you do have an honors degree of 64 and below and you're applying for a master's, or if you have a master's degree of 64 and below and you're applying for a PhD, you cannot apply to this funding source. But now I would encourage you to go onto the World Wide Web, go on the internet and search for other funding categories. So there are other funding opportunities, other funding mechanisms, there are other funders on board internationally and nationally beside the NRF, right? You just need to go out and find that and then fill in the application form for those particular bursaries. The principles that I'm going to discuss here is going to be along the same lines of what you need to do. And what I'm going to discuss here will help you not only to apply for a master's or PhD bursary, it's going to help you throughout your career whenever you write proposals and wherever you apply for money or grants or anything, right? So if you get 64 and below, all hope is not lost. You can look for other opportunities. But for the NRF purposes, for your master's and your PhD, you need to have an average of 65 and over in your previous degree. As I said, if you're currently studying for a master's and applying for a PhD, your previous degree is the degree that you're currently studying for, and we will wait for those marks to come in. So we're not going to discard that just because you got 64 and below in your honors degree, right? So we're not going to use an honors mark for a PhD application, right? So be aware of that. If you're doing a master's, we're going to use that master's mark. Right, so generally that academic merit mark is given a weighted average of 35% in the entire project. It just gives you an indication of excellence that this award is going to be accounted on. It also shows you the competitiveness of the awards in the NRF as well. So a lot of people are going to be applying, and when a lot of people apply, they're going to look for the best students, and those who obtain 75% and above in their previous degree are most likely to be awarded the bursaries, as opposed to those with 70 to 74 and 65 to 69. But generally, this is not the only criteria, and you'll see this only accounts 35. So 65% is other things as well. So you can, if you do get the lower end, and when I say lower end, if you get anything less than 70, you see you're going to be scoring a 1 in the section. If you get 70 to 74, you're going to be scoring a 2 in this section. And if you get a distinction of 75% and above, then you'll be scoring the maximum mark. So this is generally a 4-point scale. You can actually see from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. 0 being that you really haven't done anything, or you haven't met the criteria, right? So if you've not met the criteria for that particular section in your application, then you're going to get the lowest mark of 0, right? Just a little bit about this weighted or this rating scale, this 4-point rating scale as well. You'll see that it's rated here such that people who are excelling get the maximum of 3, right? So you'll see that people are excelling get the maximum of 3. Those who will get 75% and above, they completed in 3 years for a BSc degree or 4 years for a professional degree. They completed their master's in 1 year and going for a PhD. It's meant for everything. Everything worked very well for you. If you generally, these priority research areas, I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but generally the sciences and agriculture are priority research areas in South Africa. So generally we all have get a yes, and we all score 3 in that. But if you look at the others, if you take longer for your degree, an extra 6 months, a year or so, or 2 years, you see how your marks are going to drop. Your scoring is going to drop. You're not going to get a 3 anymore. You're going to go down to a 2, to a 1, to a 0 if you take too long for your degree. So over a year, you're going to score 0 for that, right? So a minimum prescribed time plus 1 year will give you a 1. Anything over, you're going to get a 0 for that, right? So these things, 1 and 2 and 3, are normally scored before the applications come to the college panels for review, right? Because we don't really have much of an input into that. There's nothing I can do if your mark for your previous degree is 74, right? I have to, automatically you'll be scored a 2. We cannot give you a 3 for that. If you complete your degree in 4 years, when it's a 3-year degree, automatically now you go to a 1, right? So it just shows you the importance of your performance in your previous degree. So this looks at your history to say that this student is actually a good student. He's got a track record. So this first 3 items actually look at your track record and what you're going to do, right? And if your track record is good and what you're going to do is good, and generally what we do in science and agriculture and engineering is very good, we all get 3s in this if everything is well, right? So generally this section here is cut and dry. What I'm going to spend a bit of time today talking about is the project outline, all right? And what is comprehensive, adequately described, partially described, and poorly stated, not eligible for funding. And as I go along the talk today, you'll see more examples of these as well. So just to pick on this project outline. So you'll see for master's applications, there isn't really a lot that you have to fill in. When you go onto the system, there's not a lot that you have to do. There's not many fields. But please be aware that when you're asked to do a project outline, this carries 30% of your weighting as well, almost as important as your academic merit. So if you can look at 30% for your project outline and then 35% for your academic merit, it's almost the same type of weighting that they actually give, right? Science, agriculture, engineering is already on a good footnote for 20% of your application. So by virtue of you being in our college, you really have a good standing already. You get a maximum for that priority research area. Because generally we are trying to solve the problems in South Africa and abroad. Right, so you have that edge when you're doing something in agriculture, engineering, and science. Is there any questions before I move to this project outline? No. Right, I'm going to come back to the project outline just now. I just want to move to the PhD one before I come back to the project outline. Now, if you look at the PhD one, we have much of the same thing in your PhD applications that we do in the master's application. There's just one change. So if you look at category number 1, that's also in your master's as well. Category number 2 is also in your master's. And if you look at the weightings, it's 30% and 15% and 10%. So you'll see there's a marked difference. If I go back to this previous slide, that's 35, 15, and 20. And if you look at this, it's 35, 15, and 10. Sorry, 30, 15, and 10. The extra 15%, so the 5% from here and the 10% from here, goes into something called the track record or research outputs. Now, the track record or research outputs is something that we expect PhD students to have and not honors students to have. So remember, if you're going to apply to do a PhD, you are a master's candidate, either doing a master's degree or already done a master's degree and applying for a PhD project. If you're a master's student, you are an honors student, right? Either doing your honors or have completed your honors. Now, we don't expect honors students to write publications. We don't expect honors students to attend seminar sessions, conferences, symposia, etc. But we do expect master's students to at least attend or be active in some sort of research activity. And that's why we include something called the track record or research outputs. Now, if you look at the track record or research outputs, in order to excel in that particular area, now I'm talking to the master's students applying for a PhD here. This is evidence of research outputs in accredited peer-reviewed publications, presentations, or conferences or symposia. So this here highlights the fact that you either published some of your scientific work. Now, in order to publish scientific work, it needs to have a fair degree of novelty, which means that no one in the world must have done that particular aspect. So I'm not talking about, groundbreaking things. I'm going to make a new cell phone. I'm going to make a car that flies in the air or something like that. It's just adding slightly to the body of knowledge that no one has thought about a particular thing. So for instance, if you in the field of engineering if you look at making medical devices, no one has made a medical device that you can walk around and monitor blood pressure as you walk, but I think that's been done already now. I'm just giving you an example. If as I walk around every 5 minutes, something can tell me what my blood pressure is. So if I see my blood pressure rising, I know I need to sit down and relax, right? If no one has done that before and you make a difference, you can actually make a device, you can write a paper on that particular thing. All right, so it's not, and I wouldn't try to aim, to do something very, very novel in a master's degree. You also have to look at the scope. What can you do? What's possible to do? And even if you make a slight incremental change. So, if you make a material that is going to degrade in the atmosphere in 1 day, and there already exist materials in the atmosphere that degrade in 5 days, but you reduce the number of days in which it can degrade. That is a small increment. That is a novel thing that you can actually publish, right? So when you're looking for things to do your work on, and even if you're looking for masters, novelty is not a criterion for a master's degree. But I encourage everyone when they're looking at their masters to have some degree of novelty in it. right? Even if it's a very, very slight degree of novelty. For PhDs, we expect, a novel project in itself. For masters, you can repeat something with a certain degree of novelty in it. So for example, if there's a particular procedure that you're following to make a molecule, you'll follow exactly the same procedure, but I'm not going to use the same starting materials. I'll use different starting materials with the same procedure, and there's some degree of novelty in that. Although it's not a novel idea, there's some degree of novelty in that, right? So if you do that as a master's student, you can publish your work, and I strongly suggest you publish your work as a master's student, and you will put yourself in a good footing to earn the maximum score in the track record. It's going to show the reviewers and it's going to show the funders that this student actually has the ability to do novel research. This student is actually PhD material, right? So it's going to hold you in good stead. Now, if you cannot make a journal article in your master's degree, because it's not that easy, right? If you look at students, they don't generally publish that much, right? Some students are good at publishing and other students are not. But if you don't make the journal article, it's not really a train smash. You can actually present at conferences. Now, we're lucky that in our college, annually we hold the Postgraduate Research and Innovation Symposium, where we call for abstracts for talks and flash presentations. If you give a flash presentation or a talk at your Postgraduate Research and Innovation Symposium, that will earn you a 1 in this category, right? So you've made 1 conference presentation by just doing that. You'll get a 1 in this category and not a 0 for no outputs. So I encourage everyone who's at a master's level applying for a degree in PhD to actually attend those conferences. It might be a bit too late now if you're applying at this particular stage, but if you're thinking of applying in 2024 for 2025, I would advise that you attend the PRIS, the Postgraduate Research and Innovation Symposium this year in December, and that you can actually score some marks here. Sometimes what happens is that you have an opportunity to go for a conference locally, and if you're very lucky and you have funds or you were able to get funds to go abroad, then you can actually use that presentation, either a poster presentation or an oral presentation. You can use it in that. So if you do 2 of those, you will get 2, right? So 1 journal article, very good, you'll get the maximum. If you just attended conferences, 2 conference presentations will get you a 2. And if you just did 1, you'll get a 1 for that. So this is just showing you the activity that you have done in your previous degree, which is a master's degree, if you're applying for a PhD. This is not for students who are on the honors level applying for a master's degree. Right, so that's the track record of research output. And that's the only difference between the master's things that are not in your control. Remember I said there's things that are in your control and things that are not in your control. So these 3 facets are not in your control if you're applying for a master's degree, and these 4 facets are not in your control if you're applying for a PhD degree. At the time of application, you will look back at your record of what you've done, and based on that, we will score you in terms of what you've done. But just take note that sometimes people go for conferences and they don't put it down here and they don't score, right? Sometimes they publish an article, they don't put it down here and they don't score. So when you ask for the track record, your research outputs, put down the publications or put down your conferences that you have been to. Right, and then the 2 things that I'm going to discuss with you is the originality of the doctoral study and the potential impact of the research. Because those are the 2 things that you are going to be writing on if you are a PhD student. All right, and just to show you here, this is the scorecard, and it just brings, so this is a master's scorecard, the master's application pre-scored. So when the applications come to us, you can see that 1, 2, and 4 here are already filled in. All these things are already filled in because, as I said, they're not subjective, right? They are all objective things that are pre-filled in, right? So you'll find that they are scored already. We will then look at your project outline and score your project outline based on what I'm going to tell you in a couple of minutes. To look at the PhD one, the academic merit, the completion time for your previous degree, and your research priority area are all filled in. You can see what I said about the research priority area. All of our projects scored 3 in that, right? So all of you are going to be solving some sort of problem that's in the prevalent either in South Africa, Africa, or abroad. And the same with the masters. You can see all of these have the 3 in that particular area. When it comes to PhD, you see we're going to look at the track. So I'm going to look, when it comes to us to pre-screen, I'm going to look at your application to see whether the applicant has a journal article and be very clear about this journal article. It's either published or submitted for publication or in press. Now, what do the 3 mean? Right, we don't really accept it. You tell me I've got an article in preparation. I'm not really going to give you any mark for that because everybody can say that they've got articles in preparation. All right, so we don't really give you any marks if you have an article in preparation. So basically what we're going to do is look at your application, make it very clear. I have published this paper in an accredited journal, right? So not just I published a paper, I published a paper in an accredited journal. If you go to our research website, you'll see a list of accredited journals. We don't allow you just to publish anywhere. So we will look at that publication. We will look at the journal. I'll cross-reference it to see if it's accredited, and then I'll give you your 3 in this area. If you have went to conferences, I will look at what conferences you've been to. There's something called predatory conferences these days that you have to watch out for. Right, so when you maybe get some guidance from your supervisor, if you're looking at going to conferences, you'll get tons of emails. When you start publishing, you'll get tons of emails to say, come to this conference and in Greece, come to this conference in Washington, come to this conference in Tokyo, etc., etc. You pay a huge amount, but it's not really an academic conference. It's more like a commercial conference where conference organizers try to get funds from academics. So be very, very careful on those conferences. There's things on the World Wide Web now on predatory conferences. Read that and get some guidance from your supervisor. I would, if you're choosing conferences, go to conferences with bona fide societies in your discipline. So for example, I'm in the chemistry societies, American Chemical Society, South African Chemical Institute, you know, the European Medicinal Chemistry Society. All of those might be good conferences to go to because they're part of larger bodies. And, you know, if there's just a conference on chemistry, you know, sometimes it's just conference on chemistry organized by a particular company. Those are normally the ones to watch out for, right? So be very, very careful in what conferences you actually choose and go to. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of now, but get some guidance from your supervisor when you're choosing conferences, right? So that track record we're going to look at, and we're going to give you a mark there. And generally, we're going to give you a mark for these 2 areas that you see here. All right, so that's what we have in that particular scorecard. All right, so the next part of my talk, so hopefully in this first part, I'm giving you a bit of an introduction. You've seen the scorecards for Masters and PhD. You've seen the criteria for the doctoral funding and criteria for Master's funding. And I think that's a good place for me to stop and take any questions and maybe take a small break before we actually go on. All right, so I'll take any questions that people may have from the audience.
Prof, you do have a question in the chat.
Let me see.
From Tembekile.
Right, Tembekile Mtumunye. Right, can you add publications that you co-authored if they are related to your master's study? Yes. So at this point in time, when you're applying and if you're in a master's degree and you co-authored publications, now co-authoring a publication indicates that you have done some sort of work in that study, right? That's why you're an author. So people are not just going to put Neil's name on a publication just because they like the way his name sounds, right? They're not going to put his name on a publication because he's their friend, etc. They're going to put his name down in a publication because they had some input into that particular paper. Now, unlike for academics, when we apply for grants, they ask us, when I put down publications, and in my publications, I have to say what I've actually done because I've got quite a bit, and they want to know now what is my role in each of those publications that I've put down. So I can actually say I've made a major contribution here. I've done all the chemistry work in this particular publication, or I've not done any of the experimental work, but I supervise the student that is doing the work, right? And I've checked the paper, I've conceptualized the project, you know, I thought about the idea, etc. Generally, students will, when they publish articles with other people, they would have done a part of the work. So generally, if I'm using an example here, if you're a microbiologist and you publish papers with people in chemistry, the chemist might have made the molecules and characterized the molecules and then gave it to someone in biology to test it for antimicrobial work. And that person did the antimicrobial work. So you did part of that work, your name went on that publication, so you can actually use it. So for your purposes, you would actually put down every publication you have at the time of application, whether it's your primary work or whether it's your co-authored work. So if you have a publication, put it down in your application, you are going to score a mark of 3 in your application. Does that answer your question? All right, so that's Tim Mikila's question. You shout out if you need more guidance on that. The second question is by Lavinia, and she says, for all the students who have returned to complete masters and PhD, will the track record be significant? Especially, is there a 2-decade break? So generally, we're not going to penalize people if they've had a big break and come back, right? So the criteria that I put on the slides in the first half of the talk is you're going to be, so if you did your honors in maybe 2010, and now you want to come into a master's, we're going to look at the mark you had in 2010, right? And we're going to score you on that. So we're not going to be more stringent on someone who's taken 10. There's nothing in the criteria that says we need to score you any less for taking a break. If you did a master's degree and you're coming back, you worked, and then you're coming back after 10 years, we're going to look at what mark you had in your master's. Now, you need to also understand, when I did my master's, I didn't get a mark. So I just got a master's degree. I was lucky, I got my master's cum laude, which means that was a distinction. But some people might not have got a distinction in those days. They just got a master's degree with no mark. So if you are one of those students who did your degree way back then and you don't have a mark, maybe see the university where you have your degree in and try to get an appraisal if you can. If you cannot get an appraisal, then maybe let us know that your master's does not have a mark because you either did it a long time ago or there's not a way of getting a mark for that. And then we'll look at how to actually score you. Right, we can discuss it with the committee and see how to score you, whether to leave it out or give you an average, etc., but we have to decide that in committee, right? But generally, there is no, we're not going to disadvantage you if you took a break. Please advise us on the conferences we should attend. I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay. So as I said, the conferences is going to be dependent on your funds. Conferences are very expensive these days, especially if you're going overseas. So you don't find master students actually going for international conferences. There are a few that do, and those are lucky ones. But generally, an international conference these days is going to cost you a minimum of 50,000 Rand. which is a huge amount of money. So I advise master's students to look locally at the local conferences. So each of your disciplines have local conferences. I know in my discipline, we have the Frank Warren Conference for Organic Chemistry. We have the South African Chemical Institute, which have conferences. Also look out for smaller workshops or symposia that you can attend. If you can attend a workshop or a symposium in your particular discipline, right, and you can contribute to that symposium and workshop, that might also hold credit in the conferences that you attend. So I'm not talking about where you go to learn something. I'm talking about, going to present your work at a particular symposium in order to give other people ideas, etc. So what I would say is go to your supervisor and see what avenues you have for a master's degree, what the budget is. More local conferences cost in the region of about 10,000 Rand. So, if 10,000 Rand is much more manageable than 50,000 Rand. So if you can have that money, or your supervisor can help you to raise that money, it's much more easier to go for a conference in that setting. Try to look for conferences. If you have a local conference in Durban, that will be much better. That's why I say the Postgraduate Research and Innovation Symposium is so important. So whenever you have some results, try to write up those results, prepare it in a presentation form, give that presentation to your research group, maybe give it to your school. I know students hate presentations. They don't like to talk. That will change as you start doing research. You want to, tell people what you're doing about your research. That will change. But I think initially, students don't really like to be in front of an audience. It's very difficult for someone to sit in front of an audience like this. Even this group is quite small, 20 participants here. You might find that, it's difficult for you to run something. So that will change as you get more and more confidence. But try more and more to talk in front of your peers. So if your group meetings amongst your 5 people in your lab, amongst maybe the 30 people in your school, you'll get more confidence. So when you go out, you can actually go to a conference in the ICC, you can stand up and give a talk and you won't be that nervous. Because I know I've been to many talks where students get very, very nervous standing in front of a crowd. It's understandable because you don't have that experience, but the more you do it, the better you get at it, right? So I encourage you to do that. Good, Timikila, I hope I've answered your question talking about the conferences. So students, it's 9:42 now. I'm going to take a small comfort break and let's get back at 9:50. So you've got 8 minutes in order to take a leg break, go to the loo if you need to, and we'll get back at 9:50. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in 8 minutes. Great. And if you could just shout out to say that you're back, and we'll just make a start on the second part of the workshop. I can see some people are back. Lavinia, you're back. Sishna, you're back. Tina, can you hear me?
Lavinia here, yes, I'm back.
Okay, perfect. Great, so let's make a start to the second part of this workshop. So we've been through the criteria, and I think it's very, very important that applicants know what the criteria is. It's like running a race and not knowing what it takes to win, right? So generally the person who crosses the line comes first. But if the criteria is who looks best while running, regardless of whether you cross that line first or not, if you don't look good while you cross that line, and someone who comes last looks very good, maybe they wear all pink and blue or something, they're going to win because the criteria are different. So it's very, very important in all aspects, not just this particular application. In all applications, in all grants, in everything that you're going to apply for, you need to know what the criteria is that you're being judged on, right? So if you can actually get hold of the criteria, and we do make it known in most of our applications, then that will hold you in good stead because you actually then know what to do. Right, so our next part of the presentation works on what to write and how to write it. Right, so now that I've told you the purpose of this, some of the criteria that we use and how we're going to go about scoring, let's see how you can actually put your best foot forward. How can you actually now go and write something that's going to show the reviewer or show the person that's choosing that you do deserve that particular bursary. Remember, I said that you are competing for that bursary. We don't just have money to dish out to anyone who applies. You're going to compete, and we're going to choose the best candidates. So how can I ensure that I seem to be the best candidate for that particular funding for my master's or PhD? I'm going to tackle the master's students first. As I said, the master's application, and generally these are for people who are in their honors year of study, applying for a master's degree, right? And they are going to now fill in the abstract and a project outline. In the PhDs, you are going to fill in the abstract, problem statement, aims and objectives, and the potential impact. Right, so you're going to have a little bit more to fill in if you're a PhD student. Right, so let's just jump to the master's. Now, at the outset, and I'm going to talk about the abstract here, and that abstract applies to both master's and PhD. Right, so in both of your abstracts, you're going to be, both of your applications, you're going to be required to put in an abstract. On abstract, be clear and concise. Can I ask you to just mute yourself if you are not going to be speaking? Great. All right, so when you are writing an abstract, be clear and concise. So make sure that you are not ambiguous in your abstract. Don't try and beat around the bush, right? So if you're going to have an abstract, you must articulate what the aim of the project is in your abstract. And generally, this is the first sentence or first two sentences. So this project aims to find a novel compound for cancer treatment. This project aims to find an alternate source of energy for motor cars. This project aims to find an alternate form of fertilizer for plant crops, right? Be very, very concise in what you're doing. This project aims to find a mechanism for the COVID-19 virus, right? So be very, very clear on what the aim of your project is and make that known in the first sentence or the first two sentences if you want to elaborate a bit more, right? So that aim is clear, that aim is concise. I know at the outset, and it's going to make a big impact if the first sentence I read or the first two sentences that I read, I know exactly what's to come in the rest of the application, right? So I know now I'm going to expect to read about a new compound that's being created for cancer. I know I'm going to have an alternate source of energy to run motor cars when I'm reading through the application. So that first two sentences is very, very important to set the scene for the rest of your application. So think very, very carefully about what those two sentences are, right? And then you go about into very, very concisely. Remember now, we're not in the project yet, right? We're just writing an abstract here. We're just very, very concisely telling people what to expect when they move forward in our application, right? So very briefly, what do you aim to do, right? And how do you aim to do it, right? So generally, if you're doing research, any form of research, right, you identified a gap in the literature. Now, this is very, very important. Identify a gap in the literature. You're not able to identify a gap in the literature if you haven't done a good literature research, right? If you've not done a good literature search, you won't know what the gaps in the literature are. You won't know what's currently being done. You won't know what previously has been done, and you're unable now to fill in that gap. As I said, if I want to make a blood pressure monitor that monitors my pressure as I walk around, and I tell people I want money for that, I'm unlikely to get money to do that particular research because that already exists. And nobody's going to give me money to make something that already exists. But had I said, I want to make a blood pressure monitor that does not have lithium batteries, because lithium batteries have been known to spill out and cause cancer in people when they, when the lithium falls out of the batteries. I'm going to make a device that doesn't have lithium batteries, right? People already know now that, okay, I'm doing something that no one has actually done before, or no one before was able to do, right? So then I'm going to identify that gap, but I need to do that literature search first to see what people have done. So as I said, you can't complete your application in the afternoon or the night before or even the week before. You need to decide months in advance that you want to do a particular topic, and then get as much literature in that topic as possible. Now, people always say, how far do I go in a literature search? Right? Do I go back 50 years? Do I go back 100 years, etc.? How far do you go back? A good literature search will go back at least 5 to 10 years, right? So if I want to do something on COVID, right? COVID started in 2019, 2020. So from 2019 to 2023, I'm going to see all the literature. There's going to be a lot of literature. And if you look at COVID, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been tons of literature on COVID-19. People, that was a new area, people went and did that, etc. You won't find things prior to that, right? So that's a starting point. If you look at something like, say, aspirin. Aspirin has been around for a long, long time. If you're going to look at the effects of aspirin on healthy individuals when they drink coffee, right? You need to look at what's being done on aspirin since it was discovered maybe 100 years or so ago, right? But you're not going to now go back 100 years and try to get everything from 100 years. You want to go back in the last 10 years, see what's been done, because you need a critical mass of information in order to make an informed decision of what you want to do. And that's why it's so important to spend time thinking about what you want to do. Because you might think, I want to do this. When you go out and look at the literature, people are already doing it. It doesn't mean that you're not going to lose your thread. It means that what you wanted to do might change slightly. It'll be molded by what you read in the literature. Now, at a master's application, so those students are generally in an honors year, we would expect anything between 20 to 25 sources of citations, right? So we would expect now for you to go and read at least 25 publications in that area and more recent publications. So don't go and look and just Google a topic to say aspirin. If you Google aspirin, you're going to find things come up in 1956, 1967. Those things are not really worrying us anymore because people have actually solved that, unless there's a running problem from 1956 to now that actually, we didn't do. But generally, you want to see now, if I want to see the blood clotting activity of aspirin, maybe it's too high. I want to make a drug that is similar to aspirin, but the blood clotting activities is much better, because remember aspirin, they thin your blood, right? So if you've got blood clotting in your body, then the aspirin is going to thin your blood and help with that blood clotting. But sometimes it makes your blood too thin, right? So in order to avoid your blood being too thin, maybe we need to make aspirin that doesn't really have so much of an effect, has some effect. And no one has done that. People throughout the years have done this on aspirin. They've investigated maybe the analgesic effect. They've investigated something else. They investigated the aspirin's use in childbirth, aspirin's use in maybe pain relieving, and aspirin's use in antivirals. But no one has actually looked at how to make it more of a coagulant. And I want to do that in my research. So you can see now how I've identified a gap in the literature, because in this 20 publications, people talked about other different things. And I'm going to cite that in the next section that you see, where we talk about the project outline, right? You're going to cite that here. But in your abstract, you're going to make it very, very clear, right, that no one has actually looked at the coagulating effect of aspirin. Now, I'm sure people have, but I'm just using it as an example. Coagulating effect of aspirin in, and that's why we're going to investigate that now. People have looked at other things on aspirin, but no one has looked at this. So you're going to make it very, very clear, right? That's your gaps. Right, I've got an example here. Synthesize a drug related to the compounds found in a natural remedy known to have anti-cancer properties. No one has done that before, right? So this is just an example here that if you got a natural remedy and that healed cancer, and no one has actually looked at what compound is causing the cancer, you want to now look at that compound. That's a gap in the literature, and then you want to make a drug from that. That's a drug, that's a gap in the literature, right? So this is like a sentence. This is an example of a sentence that you would probably have in your abstract. I want to synthesize a drug related to the compounds found in a natural remedy known to have anti-cancer properties, right? You can see how succinct this is. You can see how clear this is. And you can see now that the evaluator or the reviewer is going to know exactly what you have been done. What would the next part be about? The next part will be about maybe having some things about cancer, having some things about natural remedies, and maybe some background around this natural remedy that's going to test for cancer. Then, how are you going to do that? Once you synthesize the drug, you're going to test it for cancer. You're going to compare the activity to known drugs, because there's no use you making a drug that's worse than the drugs that we already have, right? Compared to the activity of the known drugs, and maybe evaluate its toxicity. In your abstract, you've told them a whole lot in maybe 4 or 5 sentences or 6 sentences, right? So you see, the abstract is not generally 1 or 2 sentences. It's not generally a whole page. It's very, very succinct, because the information is going to follow in the section that I'm going to discuss just now. But this is like an introductory section to all the things that you want to say later on, right? You're not going to tell them what assays you're going to do. You're not going to tell them what cancer cell lines you're going to do. You're just going to tell them, I'm going to test it for anti-cancer activity. You're just going to tell them, I'm going to compare it to known drugs. You're not going to tell them what known drugs or anything in that. You're not going to tell them what toxicity tests you're going to do. But you're going to tell the reader that I'm going to synthesize a drug, I'm going to test it for anti-cancer activity, I'm going to compare the activity to known drugs and evaluate its toxicity. You're going to tell them that's what I'm going to do in my project. That's going to be in your abstract. So an abstract is sort of like a snapshot of what I'm going to read the details about, right? So if I read the abstract, I know when I look for details on these things, I'm going to find it in what follows. What normally happens with students, in my experience, is that in the abstract, they put the entire project here, right? In the abstract, there's the entire project here. They put in, I'm going to synthesize a drug related to the compounds found in a natural remedy. Then they say, this remedy is used for X, Y, and Z. It has so much of activity. It's being used by people in South Africa, America, Swaziland, etc. People take this all the time if they are sick, and then they come back and say, we're going to test this for 3 cell lines, these cell lines. There's so much of information in this abstract that it loses the impact. Remember that a lot of times as well, especially when it passes the scientists, sometimes these things go to people that are going to award money, especially at the NRF. You might not get a scientist there that's looking at this, but they may want to read this abstract. And this abstract must be written in very lay terms, right? It must be written so that someone who is not a specialist in the field knows exactly what you want to do, and they can give you money for it. So, for example, even if Harry Oppenheimer is giving you money, he's not a chemist, right? But he can actually read this and say, okay, I know now that there's a problem with cancer. We have natural remedies. This person wants to synthesize a drug from there and compare it and try to get a new drug. I'm going to give them money to do it, right? So very, very succinctly in 1 or 2 sentences on each of these things, and then you're going to make an impact. People are going to go look forward to reading the rest of your application. If you're not successful here, if this is very boring and you don't make this impactful, right, people are not going to want to read the rest of your application, right? So if you're going to say, oh, I'm just going to study some plants, the plants might be active in something, we know that people take it, sometimes they get better. You know, if you're not very forceful and not really active in this or make an impact in this abstract, people are not going to want to read what you have later on, right? So you can compare this. You know, when you go to the movies, and I know all of you have been to movies. When you go to the movies, in the old days when we didn't have TV and movies, we had books. And when I had to go to a bookstore and choose a book to read, I don't know if they still do this. On the back of the book, they would have a synopsis of the book, right? And that one page would make you want to read the other 365 pages of the book, because that would tell you in this book, you're going to, if it was a murder mystery, this person murdered that person, we're going to look for the murder and whatever it is. If you go to a movie, before the movie starts, you'll see 5 previews of other movies, and they'll put the best parts of that movie in the preview. So you know, oh, I know I'm going to get some action here, I'm going to get some whatever here. If you like love stories, I'm going to get some love story here, or whatever it is, or some comedy here. You know exactly what to expect when you're watching that film, right? So if you're an action person and you look at the preview and you see a comedy there, you're not going to watch that, right? So this is just to make someone interested in what you want to do, right? And in the last sentence of the abstract, I would suggest you put down a sentence on what result do you aim to achieve. A lot of people leave this out, and that's why I put this as a separate bullet here. A lot of people leave that out of the abstract. What result do you aim to achieve? So, right, so I can do all this. So this is telling people what I want to do. I want to make a drug. I want to test it for anti-cancer activity, compare its activity, and evaluate its toxicity. So what, right? At the end of everything, I want to find a lead compound that can be developed into a drug, right? So people in drug development knows exactly that when Neil does his work, he's going to find a lead compound that can be developed into a drug. And if nothing else, people will read this last sentence and say, I'm going to give you money, because I know now that there's not good enough drugs for cancer. I'm going to give him some money because he wants to find a drug for cancer, right? So make this last sentence also be very, very impactful. What do you want to do, right? I want to find an alternate source of energy for motor vehicles, right? I want to, out of this, I want to find an alternate way of growing maize, right? So you need to let people know exactly what you aim to achieve. So at the end of it, what product do you expect to get when you finish your master's or when you finish your PhD? Is it just going to be a book that sits in the library? Or is it something that people can read and build on and actually take and use or help solve a problem when you complete your degree? Right, so that's the abstract, and that's for both the master's and the PhD student. Any questions on the abstract, you can just shout out. All right, so let's move on. Now, this is the project outline for master students, right? So if you're a master student, you are going to be writing a project outline. So this is not like a full-blown proposal, but there's certain things that we want you to write in this project outline. Now, whenever you fill in any of these applications, They give you a guide as to the number of characters or number of words. If a section asks you for 3,000 words, we don't expect you to put in 1,000 words, right? If there's 3,000 words, you need to write between 2,500 and 3,000 words, right? Maybe at the lower end, 2,200 might be fine. But if you can't, now remember that, when I fill in proposals, I always write more than 3,000. So if they ask me for 3,000, I always write more for 3,000. I always find myself cutting down. So I always do more and then I cut down from there. So I don't feel like, I didn't do my homework. If someone asks you for 500 words and you give them 100 words, it seems that this person really hasn't engaged with what they needed to do, right? So you need to start writing for that particular section. They will guide you. 3,000 characters, 5,000 characters, whatever it is, write that amount or just below that or somewhere near that. Don't give them too less. It just shows the reviewer that you didn't really spend time or you didn't do your application justice. And then when they're choosing, as I said, you're going to be competitive, they would rather choose someone that spent the time doing more than someone who had a very scantily report. And you can see a lot of our comments in the review section when we write these reviews is that we say that the application was too thin. So if they ask for 3,000 words and you give 100 words or 1,000 words, we're going to say this application is too thin. There's not enough meat in it, right? And you're not going to get good marks or a good score in that particular area. The first point is, right, you need references, right? And I spoke about this earlier as well. So if I'm going to do a particular topic, I need to get at least 20 to 25 publications and recent publications on that area, right? And you need to reference it. Now, the master's project outline actually deals with a literature review, right? You need to have two things here. One is a rationale and the other is a literature review. And I'll go into identifying gaps just now. But a rationale means, why do I want to do the work, right? So a rationale for doing the work is that there is a problem somewhere and I'm going to try and fix that problem, right? So if you look around you, and you're thinking of research projects, there's a number of research projects that you can do. I mean, look at our water situation, look at our electricity situation, look at our health situation, look at our education situation. There's a lot of things that you can actually do. There's a lot that's wrong. So look at to see what's wrong and what you'd like to make a difference in, and then read the literature around that area, right? So the rationale is going to be there for you. I'm going to find a new means of creating power because we need to be independent of the grid, right? We need to go off the grid. So I'm going to look at a new way of generating power, right? Maybe it's taking your potato peels and trying to find energy in potato peels or whatever it is, but your rationale is, so finding energy in potato peels is actually what you're going to do, but the rationale is that you're doing that to find a new source of energy, right? That's your rationale. I'm going to do that to find a new source of energy because South Africa has an energy crisis, right? So that's my rationale for doing the project, right? And then the literature review that you need to do it in. Once you do that literature review, and once you read in all the different types of things on potato peels, right? You're going to identify the gaps in the literature that I spoke about, right? So you're going to, from all the 25 studies that you cite, right? So when you start with your project outline and you're talking about, I'm just using this funny example of potato peels and energy, you're going to look at potato peels, what was done in the last maybe 10 years or so. There's 25 papers on potato peels. They looked at potato peels to be used at harnessing sunlight. They used at potato peels that might be used as, lighting up a light bulb, etc., etc. You're going to put all those things down there, but nobody has actually thought about taking the potato peel, putting that energy in, storing it in a battery, right? So although they've done this, so you're going to tell the reader or the reviewer what's been done on potato peels in those 20 publications, right? And then you're going to say, no, none of these people have actually looked on taking the energy and putting it in a battery. And that's what I talk about when I say identify the gaps in the literature. What is it that needed to be done that has not been done before? That is a gap, and that's what you want to do. When you identify that gap, it answers the next question. What do you intend to do? Right? So once you identify that gap, I now intend to do something in that area because no one has done something in that area. Right? And then you tell them, I intend to do that. Right? And once you tell them what you intend to do, you say, okay, now this is how I'm going to do it. Right? So how you're going to do it is generally the methodology. Now, in your project outline, you need to know what the normal methodology of doing something is, right? So you can't just make up your own methodology, right? I want to skin the potatoes and put these electrodes in, etc., etc. From the literature that you read, you would have seen certain methodologies on doing certain things, right? So sometimes the methodology might not be in that particular area. You might find a methodology that you want to incorporate in your work that's used elsewhere, all right? You're going to cite those papers in your project outline, right? You're going to reference it in your project outline and say, I'm going to use the methodology of that person and that person and that person, right? So your funder knows, and it's good to put these in what you intend to do and how you're going to do it, because the funder knows that when they do give you money, you know exactly what you're going to do and you're going to hit the ground running. You're not going to spend time now after they give you money trying to see what to do. They want to see that you did your homework first, right? So how you're going to do it, what methodology you're going to follow is very, very important, right? In whatever research that you're doing. Right, so if you're going to be doing research on, and looking at my own research area, making molecules, I'm going to use these 3 reactions in order to make my molecule, because these 3 reactions have been used before. Once I synthesize them, I'm going to characterize them by NMR spectroscopy, because that's what's currently used. Right, so also, if you look too far back, and the people who don't take current references, if I say that I'm going to make molecules and then characterize them by taking the melting point and the infrared spectrum, when people look at this review in the area, they're not going to give me money because I don't know what the current thing is. Now, currently, people get structured elucidation by NMR in the last 20 years or so. If I look at papers in the 1960s and 1970s, they had another method on how they can characterize molecules, right? So that's why I say it's also good to have recent publications and not outdated publications, because the recent publications will have the current things that you're going to do. Now, also very important in your project outline is what results do you hope to get? A lot of people leave that out. So a lot of people tell us what they want to do. They tell us how they're going to do it, and they expect that to be enough, right? People leave out the next few bullets I'm going to talk about, right? Now, you must preempt. In my project, I am going to get these things. So don't be negative in your literature review or your project outline, right? Don't be negative. A lot of people sometimes are very negative to say that I might find a cure for that, right? Or there's a possibility of us, making this molecule. So be very positive in how you write. Put your best foot forward. What results do you hope to get? In this research, I will synthesize 10 compounds. You see, I didn't say I may synthesize. I didn't say there's a possibility of me synthesizing. In this research, I will synthesize 10 molecules. So my funder knows that even if they're not active, I'm going to make 10 molecules, right? And from there, I'm going to test these molecules, maybe in anti-cancer activity, and I'm going to maybe highlight whether or not these molecules can be used in cancer treatment, right? So that's the result I hope to get. At the end of it, I want to make 10 molecules, and I'm going to tell you whether or not we can run with those 10 molecules for cancer treatment, or we should shelve it at that point and try to make another 10 molecules and look for cancer drugs, right? So that's what I hope to get at the end of my project. I want to make 10 molecules and tell you what the potential those molecules have for cancer treatment. That's the result I hope to get. Right? So tell the reader what results you hope to get. The next point is significance and impact. Right? Now, a lot of people leave this out as well, and I also find this, it's funny that they leave it out because this is a setting point for your work, right? What significance does your work have, and what is the impact of your work? And this brings you back to why you wanted to do the work in the first place, right? So if I am, spending my time looking for novel ways of, or looking for a new way of riding a motorcycle, or looking for a new way of riding a bicycle, it's not going to make that much of an impact. It's not going to be so significant, riding a bicycle or whatever it is. If I find a new way of putting a seat on a bicycle that can make your, torso not pain so much when you ride a bicycle, that's going to be significant. The impact of that, and you see people doing that, standing up cycling these days. I see it on the beachfront all the time. The impact of that is that your posture is going to be better, and you might have, better health and well-being, right? So what is the significance of what you're going to do? And each of your projects will have significance, right? Because you're all going to be looking to solve a problem. So the significance of finding an alternate source of energy is that now we don't have to rely on Eskom for our energy anymore. The impoverished people can, the disadvantaged communities can also get energy if they use this very cheap means of energy. That's the significance. That's my impact. I'm going to make an impact in the rural areas that don't have access to clean water and energy by doing this research, right? So when people give you money, they're giving you money to solve those particular problems, right? So outline that significance, outline that impact. And that ties into the problem that you're hoping to solve, right? You're hoping to solve the problem of energy or medicine or water, whatever it is, you're hoping to solve that, outline there. Because people put money in different areas. And they might say, okay, this is water research. I can see the water research there. We need to spend money on it. This is Eskom research. This is energy. I'm going to put money into it. This is climate change. I'm going to put money into it. This is healthcare. I'm going to put money into it. So what problem do you hope to solve? So I'm, as a chemist, as a medicinal chemist now, I'm not going to be interested in finding alternate energy sources. I'm not going to be interested in finding another means of a way of producing water or purifying water, but I am going to make drugs for the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm going to try to solve all our health problems, right? So that's the problem I hope to solve. I'm going to outline, I'm going to put that there in my project outline, right? And at the end, how are you going to make life better and improve on what we already have, right? So you're doing all this here and people don't articulate that properly, because sometimes all of these things. When I read these applications, I just see, why didn't the student actually write these things down, right? How are you going to make life better? As I said, you might make life better by making an alternate source of energy that disadvantaged people can actually afford. I want to make medicine in South Africa to make it more affordable so that everybody can afford healthcare, right? That's how I want to make life better. And how I'm going to improve on what we already have. Right now, we do have anti-cancer drugs, but I want to make cheaper, affordable anti-cancer drugs. So that's how I'm going to improve on that. Or I want to make a drug with less side effects, fewer side effects. I'm going to improve on what we already have, right? So outline that in your application is going to hold you in good stead. I just got two silly examples in the bottom here that gives you a good indication. When I was young, I drove to work in a Lamborghini. My father tells his son, and then his son, which is later on, says, "Dad, did you melt the polar ice caps? Don't forget to charge the car when you get home." Right? That's what the son told his father. So you see how things evolve. The father just thinks about the car that he's driving, not worrying about killing the atmosphere and climate change. But the son, 20 years from now, worries about the polar ice caps. They only use electric cars and they charge their cars when they go home. Right? So you see how we went from fuel-based fossil fuels to electric cars. Right? I'm not sure in the next 30 years, I'll be very surprised if people still use cars with fossil fuels in the next 30 years or so. If you read the bottom one, it says, Dad, why did you have telephone lines in your day? Did you hang the telephones from there? Son tells his father. So you can actually see now, and I'm sure people don't even know what telephone lines are, but in my day, we had telephone lines everywhere because they're only landlines, right? And these days, everybody has cell phones. So there's no such thing as telephone lines these days. I think even telecom is going bust because there's no room for landlines, right? So today, everything is cell phones, and we use the satellite signals. So you see how we went from landlines to cell phones, and I'm sure from cell phones, I don't know what we're going to go to next. It might be just we're talking to our watches, etc. All right, so that's the master's project outline. Any questions on this master's project outline? No. All right. Now, the PhD problem statement is much of a muchness with what I just described, right? So in the PhD, you have a problem statement where you outline what problem you're trying to solve, just like what we discussed for masters. But here, you're going to put that separately, right? So everything that we just discussed, you're going to have a separate problem statement on what problem you're trying to solve, right? It will help you in this section to show the severity of the problem, right? And as I say, some statistics will help here. So unlike a master's, when a master's writes their problem statement, they're just going to say, I want to find a drug to cure COVID, right? And I want to find a drug to cure COVID, and I hope that I make a drug that has less side effects than current drugs. Or I want to make a drug that has is more active than the current drugs we have. That's what the master's student will say. A PhD student is going to be more in-depth. So remember, people applying for a PhD project are people doing master's degrees. When you look at the literature, you look at some statistics. So you're going to tell people in the last 3 years, 5 million people around the world have died from COVID, right? You're going to say 1 million alone had died in South Africa. And you're going to put some statistics there. You're going to put some references here. You're showing people that you're working on a real problem that's a real thing, right? If I'm going to find now a drug for migraines, right? And no one really died from migraines in the last 5 years or so. The people that died from COVID is much more than the people that died from migraine headaches, right? So if I'm going to fund a project and I'm going to choose, I'm going to fund the COVID project and not the migraine project, right? Because the severity of the problem is not the same. If I want to make televisions, right, and another person wants to find a source for energy, right? Our ESCOM problem is much better than just finding another television. I'm going to give money to the ESCOM problem. So you can see, show the severity of the problem. We've had load shedding in the last 10 years, and this has impacted on economies. It's reduced our GDP by so much, etc., etc. You see, if I'm going to talk about all of that in my problem statement, it's going to make someone give me money to solve that. So show the severity of that problem. Try to highlight it. Make it known that it is a problem. Look at these statistics. Look at the people dying. Look at the impact it had on economies with load shedding. Look at when people don't have running water, what happens? You know, when people don't have clean water, how many people died from cholera, etc. Show the severity of that problem. And wherever possible, statistics will help in your cause, and provide references. So don't just say 5 million people died off the top of your head. You need to put a World Health Organization reference in there to support your statements, right? That's being scientific. So scientists never allow people to say, make statements without substantiating them. So I can't just say, you know, half our master's students failed last year. I must put some statistics from UKZN to say half the students failed last year, or half the students did not get funding last year because they didn't know how to fill in an application. I must get some statistics and put that in here, and maybe a reference, someone wrote a report on that. So you need to do some work before you can put those things down. Right? The aims and objectives is very much related to what I said in the master's, right? Now, how does it differ in the PhD? In the PhD, you want to put the aim of your project down and make it known that these are the things that you want to actually do. So for example, the aim of my project might be to find a cure for cancer. It might be to find a novel drug for cancer. It might be some other things, right? Do you want to reduce the side effects of cancer treatment by finding a drug based on a natural remedy? So I might want to do that, right? So that's the aim, right? And try and link your aim to the gap in the literature that I spoke about, right? If no one has done that before, if no one has looked at a natural remedy for cancer treatment before, so there might be natural remedies that cure cancer, but no one has actually looked at the active compounds in there and tried to make a drug from there. If no one has done that, I must actually say that is the aim of my project, right? And make that clear in that. Then from that aim, go on to your objectives. How do I want to, so I said what I want to do, how am I going to do that now? And it boils down to the same thing that I said in the master's one, but just a little bit more. So you can see the PhD is a little bit more work than a master's, where you have to prove things, you have to put down instances, you're going to have to put down statistics, right? Here you're going to say, how am I going to reach my aim? What is your plan? What is your methodology? Right? You're going to put that down. This is the plan. I'm going to look at finding 3 natural remedies, not just one. Remember, it's a PhD project now, so your reviewer wants to know what work you're going to do. In the master's, we didn't really say I had 3 plants. I just said I want to find a natural remedy from this particular thing. In my PhD now, I'm going to study 3 plants. I'm going to study 7 plants. I'm going to screen 150. I had a PhD project where my PhD students screened 150 plants, and from the 150 plants, chose 3 from there to work on. All right, that's my plan. What do I plan to do? That's my plan. From those 150, after screening them, I chose the 3 best ones. I looked at the compounds from those 3 best ones, and then I tested them. What are your chances of success? Can I just go and take a plant outside my office? And I walk outside and take some plants and try to look for things? No. The chances of success is going to be very, very high, because the plants that I'm screening have already been used by the people in the rural areas as medicine. And this make an impact in the rural areas in medicine. So my chances of finding a drug from them is very, very high. All right? Are you building on work already done? And that's very, very important, because we don't just, one day decide to do science and then we decide to reinvent the wheel, right? So we can say, and that's why I said literature is so important. In these 5 publications, they tried to make this molecule. They got up to a certain stage. I am taking off from there, right? This is my idea. Once they made that, they were unsuccessful, but I have several ideas to complete that synthesis. I'm building on someone's work, right? That's what I want to do. So your chances of succeeding is very, very high. If it's a completely new idea, you need to let the reviewers know this is a completely new idea. So I want to look at making energy from leaves. I can see that chloroplasts make energy. I want to use that same things that the plants use to make energy. I want to try and make energy like that. That's a new idea. No one has done that before. Where did I get that idea from? I got it from, thinking about how plants make energy. And I now thinking of, I want to use that same machinery in plants. So there's no literature on that. There's a new idea. This is how I got it. And this is what I want to do. So people will now see, okay, I can actually see that Koorbanally thought about how plants make energy, and he's going to use that same machinery to make energy for humans. So there might be something in that, right? So don't just say, I just want to make energy from the sun, right? And not tell them where your idea came from. Tell them where your ideas came from and tell them what your chances are of exceeding. And then, as I say, everything that you do, referencing is very important. Where did I get that idea from? What has been done before? This person did that aspect. That person did that aspect. There's a gap in this aspect. No one has done this aspect. They've tried to do this aspect, but they failed. Who are the people working in your area, right? You need to cite them. And that's the 20 to 25 references that I spoke about. All right. And the last thing that I have here is the potential impact. Now, once you do all that, right? Once you've told people all that, right? there's a section for the PhDs called potential impact. Now remember, in a master's application, all these things are missing. So in your project outline, you need to identify all of this. It's not going to be as in-depth. You see, there's an entire section on impact for a PhD. So for a master's, you're going to write 2 or 3 sentences. For a PhD, you're going to have an entire section that asks you for about 500 words or 1,000 words or whatever it is, right? So you're going to tell them now if your research is going to make a difference in the world, right? So the potential impact, you also need some background in this as well. What happens? What will the impact be if I do make a cancer drug with fewer side effects? If I make an anti-cancer drug with fewer side effects, it's going to hit the market, replace all those other drugs. All the patients are going to take my drug now because they can take my drug and not feel sick, right? So it's just like when you have a headache, you take aspirin and Panado, you know it's not going to make you sick, it's going to make you better. When you take the anti-cancer drugs, people feel sick for a while, they lose their hair, you know, they don't feel good. So if the impact that my drug is going to make is going to be huge, right? So you're going to say that this drug that I'm going to make is going to revolutionize the anti-cancer drug market globally, because I'm not just going to be able to sell it here. Worldwide, people are going to buy my drug because it's, so sell yourself. You can see how I'm trying to sell what I'm trying to do, right? You are making that impact. Are you going to make people's lives easier or better? Because a lot of research that we have makes people's lives easier or better. Look at going from the landline to the cell phone. You know, I don't have to worry about wherever I am in the world. Now I can contact my wife and child at home because now I have the means of doing so. I can WhatsApp, I can do various things. It makes people's lives easier. It makes people's lives better, you know, because I now have drugs that I can take when I'm sick. I can take them and I can continue to work. It makes the people's lives better. If I got water that can come out of a tap, which I can drink, it makes my life much easier, much better, rather than taking water from a well, purifying it, filtering it, purifying it, and then, you know, that takes me too much of time. So if I can work out a method in which I can deliver clean, potable water to everybody, that is a research that makes people's lives better and easier. Put that down in this potential impact area. Also use referencing in this area as well. You can say, in rural areas, 90% of households do not have potable drinking water delivered to their taps. All right, and you can actually say now your research is going to be able to deliver water to their taps. All right, so show people how you're going to make lives better or easier. And when it comes to impact, you must show by how much. Right? You must show what impact you're making. So are you making a small impact? So I made a cancer drug. It's got side effects. You know, people start to lose their hair. But in this one, people lose their hair after 2 weeks, not 3 weeks. Right? So that's not much of an impact. But the impact you're making, if I take this drug here, by how much? You can actually say that this person taking this drug will not lose their hair at all. Right? This person taking this drug will not have nausea. That's what an impact will have, right? I've got a few funny examples here that I'll talk about, but just sell your work in that particular way. See, this person said, I made a phone that people could carry around with them as it operates off a beacon and not through wires. How convenient is that? And you see how that is going to change the world, how it's going to make people's lives easier. This is cell phones, right? So they took the landline and they made a cell phone from there. That was very convenient. Whoever thought about that made millions and millions of dollars, right? I made 3 new antibiotics against a wide spectrum of pathogenic bacteria. These can be used when currently used drugs are no longer effective against pathogenic bacterial species due to mutations. This will save millions of lives. So this drug, when other drugs become resistant, so you're sick, you got the flu, you're taking a drug, you're not getting better. I got a new antibiotic that's going to make me better. You see how it can save millions of lives. That's the impact you can make. And the last one, I found a new antiviral drug against SARS-CoV-2. COVID can now be treated with this drug. This has reduced the mortality rates caused by COVID by 99%. Right? So when I get COVID now and I'm diagnosed, they'll give me an antibiotic, I take the antibiotic, within 3 days I'm better, just like when you get the flu. And that's what COVID's becoming these days, right? So imagine if you do that, you made that impact. COVID is not really the problem it was years ago when people had to stay at home, right? So sell your research, show people the impact, make those statements. That's why I get very, very uneasy, and I think that people didn't have training when I see applications come from masters and PhD students, or sorry, masters and honors students for these bursaries, that they write very little. You can see how much there is to write. You know, I'm talking a bit too much here, but I mean, you can see how passionate you can actually become about your research. And you need to become passionate in your writing, right? And you must put that down in words. You're not going to have a chance, opportunity to sell your research. And that's why I also said that as you go about in your research, you'll see how important seminars are, how important presentations are, because then you get to stand in front of an audience and show your passion for that subject. You don't just get to write a paper or something. I can stand in front of an audience and show people why they should continue to fund me for my anti-cancer research and my antibiotic research. If I can show people why they continue to fund me for my antibiotic and anti-cancer research, the money is going to keep on coming in, and I'm going to constantly being active in my particular area, right? So I hope that I instill some of that passion in you today to carry out your research, and also showed you some methodology, gave you some examples of how to write, what to write, how to put forward the best possible application that you can actually put forward. Just something I want to reiterate about timescales. You cannot, and I'm reiterating this, you cannot decide to apply for this in one day. It's a process, right? So I would give myself 6 to 8 weeks at the minimum, more if you can, but 6 to 8 weeks as a minimum to do your homework, to get your things done, and to actually get your applications going, right? So give yourself enough time to do. You cannot do all the things I spoke about today in a week. You cannot do all the things I spoke about today in a day or two. You're going to need some time to do this, right? Now, the last thing I want to talk about, any questions from the audience before I go along, right? So the last 3 things I want to talk about is the checking the opinion and the supervisor approval. Now, you've got all these things. Don't go straight to the application and type in all the information directly onto the application. Do your application on a Word document, right? So prepare your application on a Word document. So copy all the headings down. So when you go to the system, see what the headings are required. Copy those headings to a Word document, and then work on your Word document. Once your Word document is complete, give it to someone to check. Now, this can be a friend. When I say a friend, you know, not a friend who's not in your field, a friend who's working with you in the field. It can be a fellow student. It can be your supervisor. It can be your mentor. If you have a mentor and a supervisor, some people's supervisors are mentors. Some people have a different mentor to a supervisor. You can't give it to a mentor if they have time. Give someone to check. They will check it for spelling and for grammar. And sometimes I do this with my colleagues. Sometimes I want to say something in a particular way, and it might come across differently when someone reads it. When someone reads it, then they will give me some feedback and say, but I didn't think you actually said this right, or it's coming across in this way. Maybe rephrase what you wanted to say, all right? So give it to someone to check. Also, give it to someone to get an honest opinion, all right? This, again, can be a friend, it can be a colleague, it can be a student, it can be a supervisor. Tell them, what do you think of my idea? And maybe you can also bump up opinions before you embark on the process. Say, I'm thinking of doing a master's degree. I'm thinking of doing a PhD degree. This is what I want to do. Do you think it's the right thing to do? Right? So get an opinion. I want to make anti-cancer drugs. Do you think that that field, people who are my colleagues will tell me, but you know, everyone's looking for anti-cancer drugs these days. But no one is looking for anti-diabetic drugs. Maybe get into diabetes because South Africa has more of a diabetic problem than an anti-cancer problem. Now, so get an opinion. This opinion will not change your mind. That opinion is there to make you think about your decisions. right? Only you can change your mind. So even if you get an opinion where someone says do anti-diabetic research, but you're still passionate about anti-cancer research, you just got an opinion, right? You don't really need to take that opinion. You can just consider the opinion and make your informed decision. But get that opinion on your application. People will also in that opinion probably tell you that I don't think you made much of an impact in your research. Maybe make more of an impact. I don't think that you surveyed enough literature. Maybe look for another 10 examples. I don't think you've covered that area. You left out a particular area. Maybe look at that. Right? So that opinion is very important. Now, in order to do the checking and get an opinion, it means that you would have to complete your application at least a week or 2 weeks before the deadline, right? So time yourself such that you can complete your part at least 2 weeks before the deadline, so you can get the checking done, you can get the opinion done, and you can get your supervisor's approval. Also, chat to your supervisor to see what is his availability during that time when you need to submit. Because sometimes when you need to submit is the time when he is marking exams and going for a conference and everything else, and now you want him to look at your proposal and make some comments, right? So also look at his availability. If he is available 3 weeks beforehand, it actually means that you must do your part 3 weeks beforehand, right? Now, the supervisor approval is very, very important. One, because sometimes supervisors can rephrase things for you. They can redo things for you to make more of an impact. You can see that I have good experience about impact, and your supervisor also has good experience about impact. You may not have that experience, right? And I can see the difference between applications where the supervisor has gone through it and applications where the supervisor has not gone through it, right? So maybe just bank on your potential supervisor, and most supervisors will want to do this because you're going to be joining them for their research, and they want to see what you're going to be doing, what your ideas are. And they're going to say, not this way, but this way. Don't do that, but do this, right? So they're going to do that, but give them enough time to look at the application. So don't just do it the night before, the week before, and then they're going to be too busy, and then you're not going to get a good application going forward, right? So supervisor approval is almost a necessity in order to be successful. Almost all students, in fact, all students that had supervisor interactions and applied last year were successful, right? And very few students who I saw just went in with no one else. You can see they didn't do the checking, they didn't get an opinion. They were very poor. Remember that we are the first phase of screening, and once we're done, it goes to the NRF for their screening as well. Good. So that's all I have to tell you today. I hope that I've been impactful in my presentation. I'm going to open the floor up now for any questions from the audience. You can drop your questions in the chat and pick it up from there as well. Are there any questions from the audience? Tina, is there any questions on the chat group that's...
I see a hand up on someone's camera is on.
Sure, go ahead and ask your question. I don't see anything.
I think the attendee has logged in with their cell phone because it's written here Samsung SM.
Okay. Go ahead and unmute yourself and please ask a question if you got one. I see there's a question in the chat. Do you know when the deadlines for application will be? As I said, the Student Funding Office is hoping to get the information, all the technical information from the NRF. As soon as they get that, they will put out the call, right? They will put out the call for the internal closing date. And so just watch on the university notice system what the internal closing date is, and that will be communicated. I will also try and send all students that are registered in CAS in my college, I will send out to communicate to them as well. But please keep looking at the deadlines on the university notice system. for these deadlines for applications. I can't see hands. Let me just end my presentation. I'm just going to stop sharing. I can see a question from Samsung. Go ahead, unmute yourself. Samsung SM. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I can hear you.
My name is Leanda Mauyo from UKZN.
Good.
PhD student.
Welcome.
Was just requesting, is it possible to have access to those brief notes or presentation?
What I can do is I can put this presentation on our CAS website. So after this, I will put the presentation and the recording onto our CAS website.
Okay.
Right, and then I will let you know. So try to visit, if you visit our CAS, so if you go to the College of Agriculture, Engineering and Science website on the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and you go to research, if you go to the research page, if you scroll right to the bottom, you'll see my presentation from last year as well. And hopefully I'll put today's presentation there, and maybe I'll put the presentation and the video of today's session there, so you can look at them in your own time. Maybe when you're applying, you want to re-look at something or look at the video again, you can do so. So I will do that.
Thank you so much. Otherwise, I've enjoyed your presentation.
That's great.
It has been great. Thank you
so much. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm hoping that this will make a difference when you apply, and I'm hoping to get all your applications in the college and screen them, and I'm sure that you're all going to do great in your research. So bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day further, and I hope to see you soon.
Prof, if I may come in before the colleagues leave.
Sure.
Colleagues, yes, thank you, Prof. I have in the chat put up an evaluation form to be completed. Please make sure that you complete the evaluation form as it is a requirement from our funder.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tina. I see there's another question. If you're already doing your PhD and you're not funded, can you apply? Yes, you can apply. You will also have an edge because you can apply now using your current project. And hopefully by the time you're applying, if you're already doing a PhD, you'd have had a literature review. So you would give yourself an edge. So all those that are not funded in their second and third year of PhD, I would strongly encourage you to apply for NRF funding. Good. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for your nice comments in the chat. And I wish you a pleasant day further and good luck in all your research. Bye-bye.